today's talk is the four Dharmas of Gampopa. And Dharmas have, or Dharma has two different meanings. One is that it is the truth, such as the sky is blue. But as it is used here, it refers to the teachings of the Buddha. And you could also say the Buddha Dharma. So this is about the Buddhist path from start to completion. And Gampopa is the author of these four verses, and he is the teacher in the Kagyu lineage that actually brought the lineage to the form that it is now. Before him, there was not a monastic tradition. It was primarily Maha Mudra, and some other practices too, but primarily Maha Mudra through Marpa and Milarepa. And Gampopa brought the training of the Kadampa school, which includes the 7 points of mind training, and then monasticism that also came from the Kadampa school. So he's a very important person in the lineage, and his main student was the first Karmapa, Dusam Khenpa. So the four dharmas, or the four verses, are: grant your blessings so that my mind may be one with the Dharma. Grant your blessings so that the Dharma may go along the path. Grant your blessings so that the Dharma may clarify confusion. And grant your blessings so that I may transform confusion into wisdom. So the first Dharma, it's frequently translated as may my mind be one with the Dharma. Rinpoche, let's see, I'm using, that's a good point. I'm using a book by Trangu Rinpoche, and it's on the four Dharmas of Gampopa. I don't have, I'll tell you what, it's actually online, and I'll copy it and I'll post it, and then you can refer to this. Let's see, where is the chat? There it is. It didn't work out. I'm just going to go on with my teaching. Enough of this. May my mind go into the Dharma is the way Trangu Rinpoche feels is the meaning of those words. It's aligning our mind with the Dharma wholeheartedly. And this is talking about the beginning, when we first come in contact with the Dharma, that it's really important that we want to align our mind with the Dharma. That, as he said, if we don't have our mind aligned with the Dharma, then what we do with our body and speech really won't be much benefit, even if your body spends a lot of time in a shrine room. So the first obstacle to this happening is laziness. And in a way, this is the main point, is that we have to, if we are going to be one with the Dharma, we have to work with our laziness. And so that brings up, well, what exactly is laziness? And I found that I could really relate to these three types of laziness when I first came in contact with them, because it was like somebody nailed me when they came up with these. The first is underestimating yourself, thinking, oh, I couldn't do that. Other people are capable of practicing and making progress and so forth, but I couldn't do that. When in fact what this is really a lack of courage, that a lack of wanting to leave where we are and progress. And it's important to realize that we have Buddha nature, that we have this ultimate mind, which is perfection. It's beyond good and bad. It is radiates limitless love, limitless compassion. It is wisdom and so forth. And this is who we really are. And we are not giving ourselves credit for this. And as I said, it's a point of laziness and a lack of courage, not wanting to leave where we are, the clinging where we are, where it feels comfortable. And leaving that can be uncomfortable. So the second type of laziness is laziness of attachment to bad actions. And that is busyness, compulsive busyness to trivial actions, actions that really aren't important. It's interesting that people that are procrastinators, one way of procrastinating is to get involved in meaningless things. And you don't ever get around to doing what's important. So the idea is we need to contemplate on impermanence of life and on karma and its side effects, so that we can realize that the little unimportant things that we spend all our time doing really have no significance. That when you are gone, you will leave it all behind. And you're not going to be on your deathbed wishing that you spent more time on Facebook or Twitter. So the point of contemplating karma is that when we understand karma, we develop the ability to control our lives and our experience. We can create the life that we want to. And we see the importance of practice. The third type of laziness is indifference, doing nothing at all. I like to call it couch potato laziness, where you just, you wake up in the morning and you start thinking about all the things you have to do and realize, oh, I'll never get it all done, or at least you think that. So then you go back to sleep, and then you get up and then you eat breakfast, and then after a little while you're pretty exhausted, so then you lay on the couch, and so on as the day goes by. And so the remedy for that is to contemplate the suffering of samsara, and to realize that by this kind of laziness, we are just getting deeper and deeper and deeper into samsara. And he uses an interesting definition of samsara, which goes back to what I said before we started, in that life is just solving one problem after another. And so he defines samsara as, quote, that which has hardships and obstructions. So here is a quote from him on page 8, when we understand that the problem isn't just some temporary situation like being in the wrong situation or not having enough money, and that suffering is the very nature of samsara, then we realize that only the Dharma can allow us to achieve liberation from suffering of samsara. So to continue, that is the meaning of may my mind become one with the Dharma. And the second Dharma is grant your blessings so that the Dharma may go along the path. So this involves the need for motivation to travel the path, to bring about fruition, to bring about enlightenment and Buddhahood. So there are two types of motivation, and one is the Hinayana, and the other is, in his words, the very pure, exceptional motivation of the Mahayana and Vajrayana. And so we need to choose the Mahayana Vajrayana motivation, which is that we aspire to accomplish the welfare of all sentient beings without exception. If you are going to go along the path to its fruition, you need to have that motivation. Without that, you may achieve something good, but you will not attain complete enlightenment. And not only that, but you will also attain being able to have a tremendous impact on the welfare of others. So there are different ways of developing this motivation. A common in the Tibetan tradition is to take refuge, then arouse bodhicitta, then take your bodhisattva vows, and then do the preliminary practices of Nundro. And then after that, start practicing shamatha meditation. But Trungpa Rinpoche says that that is the way they did it in Tibet. And here in developed countries, that we need to practice the methods of pacifying our mind first. In other words, shamatha meditation. And all the teachers that I have had have stressed shamatha meditation. We don't realize this as Westerners, but Tibetan minds back in Tibet before the Chinese, they weren't nearly as busy as our minds were. And what I have seen in my 74 years is that our minds are getting busier and busier and busier. And our bodies are getting busier and busier and busier. Perhaps not now because of self-isolation, but nobody's home when we did not have to self-isolate. We were always out doing something. So he talks about shamatha meditation, and there are 9 stages. I'm going to go through it very, very, very briefly. I might not even touch on all of them. But he goes through the 9 stages on page 10 through 16. And basically, we progress from one stage to another. And it's the way our mind is working with the meditation techniques. So it's progressive and it's successive. The first one is resting the mind. And this is what happens when you first start meditating. You start following the breath, and for an instant, you are following the breath. And then your mind goes off in running with thoughts. But you can have, even if it's for a brief instant, the experience of calmness. As a good teacher will point out, the very fact that you are aware that your mind is erasing all over the place is a good sign. It shows that you are aware. So the next stage is continuous resting, where this is where you get a glimpse of having discursive thoughts, but you're not carried away. It doesn't mean that you just sit there then for the rest of the meditation session not being carried away, but you have a little bit of not being carried away by the thoughts and being able to watch them and be aware of that they are thoughts. Kind of like being in a park and watching what's going on in the park, but not participating in it. The third is patch-like resting. And this is like putting a patch on a hole in your jeans. And this is, quote, when agitation arises, we maintain our mindfulness and awareness, and that very act of recognition will be enough to restore our tranquil state. Another problem that arises with this stage of meditation is stupor. That again, we recognize the stupor, and we get back to concentrating on our object of meditation. And so patch-like means that our concentration goes like a patch ripped from clothing. And then we put it back on, like you stitch a patch back on the cloth, the clothing. The next one is close placement. And this one is our gross thoughts and emotions subside, but the subtle ones persist. And they become more apparent. And at this point, boredom and apathy becomes a problem. We hit a wall, and so that very subtle subconscious gossip kind of carries us away. And at this stage, for many people, motivation declines. And it's good to realize that boredom is not a problem. There is hot boredom and cool boredom. And hot boredom is I'm bored and it's a problem. Cool boredom is I'm bored and it's not a problem. I can be with the boredom. I don't have to have thoughts to entertain me. So if you can go beyond that, then is pacification. So this is the antidote for this close placement, the boredom, and the subtle subconscious gossip. So at this point, you don't have to force yourself to practice. If you're not interested or if you are depressed, you just do it. Because first of all, you realize that it's probably the best thing that you could be doing. So you maintain your motivation to do the practice, again, through contemplating impermanence, karma, and so forth. And I'm going to be going over these 4 thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma in May. So I will touch on these again. They're very important to contemplate as we progress along the path. So we need to, at this stage, contemplate the benefits of practice, realize what would happen if we didn't practice, and you might say even develop a certain desire to not backslide and go back to where you were before you were practicing. From there, then we go to subjugation. So here, again, this is another antidote for close placement, the boredom, hitting a wall, giving into the subconscious gossip. And this is become best friends with yourself. Take a break from shamatha and look at your negative thoughts and emotions. And then look at the time when you gave in to these negative emotions, whether it be anger or desire, jealousy, pride, or whatever, and the harm that you caused yourself and others. So here is a quote: we can remember how we put ourselves through painful and demeaning situations in order to pursue our lust or ambitions, how we compromised ourselves or indulged in actions that brought us only misery and harm, or how we embarrassed ourselves in our effort to win love or used deceitful tactics to reach our goals. So examine yourself closely, examine your mind closely, but do this with a gentleness, not to beat yourself up, but to realize that this is a huge problem and it causes me tremendous suffering. And I want to leave this behind. It's really important at this stage to develop loving kindness for yourself. The Karmapa, in a talk that he gave a couple of days ago when we had the prayers, it may have been yesterday morning, he said the antidote to corona is karuna. And karuna is Sanskrit for loving kindness. So here, look at yourself kind of like a loving mother looks at a child, and look at yourself as wanting to be kind to yourself, nurture yourself, help yourself grow in a positive way. So that's what's meant by becoming best friends with yourself. Through subjugation, which is the next stage, our awareness increases with mindfulness and we become aware of thoughts or moods arising without even trying to be mindful. We're naturally mindful. And so at this point, we're actually not putting a lot of effort into mindfulness and awareness. We have trained so well, it just happens naturally. And of course, this is a very advanced stage. From there, the next one, point number 8, is one-pointed concentration. And so this is the ability to stay focused without getting overwhelmed by thoughts and emotions. So another quote here: this doesn't mean that discursive thoughts and emotions will cease. It just means they will no longer be a preoccupation, and that we will be able to maintain an unwavering sense of awareness. The last stage is meditative equipoise. So at this stage, there's no longer any deliberate mindfulness or awareness. It's spontaneous. Milarepa once said that I can no longer meditate. And what he meant was that he can no longer not meditate. So it just happens naturally. And of course, this is the end of the path for meditation or developing meditative concentration. So that is the second Dharma of Gampopa, which is grant your blessing so that the Dharma may go along the path. This is one reason why we do a lot of meditation here. It's difficult now to do this online on Zoom. I just can't imagine doing that, quite honestly. But when we get back to meeting, we will definitely do a regular meditation. So the third Dharma is grant your blessing so that the Dharma may clarify confusion. So this is about how we can abandon confusion. We have to realize that we are confused beings. We are not seeing things clearly. We are, you might say, seeing things in our own little deluded world called samsara. The main point is that Gampopa is talking about selflessness or egolessness and emptiness. And this is not realized naturally. It's realized through practice and primarily practice of meditation. There are advanced practices that we can do, and some of us are doing our own deity practice at home. But since confusion is not inherently existent, it can be abandoned. That our confusion, our ignorance is impermanent and it's inherent of existence. It arises due to causes and conditions, which is another way of saying it is caused by our karma. And interestingly enough, it is our body and our mind that is confused, that experiences samsara. That is our body and our mind that experiences unhappiness, hardships, difficulties, and obstacles. Our speech might express them, but our speech does not experience samsara. And of course, between those, the mind is more important or above the body. There's a feedback loop that the body affects the mind as well. As you very well know when you're sick. But ultimately, the mind is on top. It is the mind that experiences desire, hatred, and ignorance. And Trangu Rinpoche says desire is related to hope and fear, or hope. Anger is related to fear. And then he breaks down ignorance into two types, mixed and unmixed. The mixed is this ignorance is mixed with desire or hatred. And that when desire is born within us, it's mixed with ignorance. And when hatred is born within us, it's mixed with ignorance. And so our hopes are clouded by ignorance. And this is because we don't see the situation clearly. We begin to hope for things that aren't possible, that aren't beneficial. and we end up hoping in vain. And the ignorance related to fear is it's just not seeing clearly. We react to somebody. We express some hostility, and they in turn throw the hostility back at us, even though there's no real basis for aggression. The second type of ignorance is unmixed ignorance. And this is not associated with desire or aggression. And it has two types. It's not being aware of the situation and misperceiving the situation. The first is you just don't realize what the situation is. You're kind of clueless. And you don't have any desire to find out the truth. We're just apathetic. We're just not interested. I think this is a very, what would I say? It's a stereotype, but it would be the absent-minded professor who goes to work with two different colored socks on because he just doesn't care. And there are a lot of people that go through life with that approach. They really don't understand what's going on. And they don't care. The other is having a mistaken belief about what's going on. And so this would be a person that thinks good is bad or bad is good. So here's a quote from Krangu Rinpoche. So these different factors disturb our minds, but what is important to realize is that we have created all this trouble for ourselves. No one else did it. It didn't come from somewhere else. Once we start going in this way, we become unhappy, we become crazy, and we become mad. The central point is I created all this trouble for myself. It didn't come from outside of me. And this is something that I really have come to appreciate about Buddhism. And that is when you have this approach, it empowers you. It gives you the ability to change and to change how you experience life instead of the way most people in samsara go about their lives, and that is that they blame. They blame other people for their problems, or they blame themselves for their problems. If you blame other people, there's either nothing you can do about it, or you've got to go and change other people. And you get into the ridiculous situation of you're meeting with that person and you're thinking, I'm right, I'm never going to change my mind. However, I can change your mind. And then you get in an argument and they're thinking, I'm right, I'm never going to change my mind, but I can change your mind or at least hurt you. And when you're blaming yourself, basically that is saying that you are, this is the self-deprecating that I talked about at the very beginning about the first type of laziness, selling yourself short. You are thinking things like, there's just something wrong with me. I'm always screwing up. I'm always making mistakes. Oh, I can't do that. And it leaves you powerless, helpless, and hopeless. So if we take the attitude that I can do things to change so that I'm not reacting the way that I have been reacting, that empowers you. It gives you tools. It gives you motivation to do things. And it's amazing when you feel like you can do something about it. Even if you don't seem to make a lot of progress, it still lifts your mood. So the bottom of all of this, or you might say the root of all of this, is taking what is not a self to be a self, to be that you are something that is solid, true, existing, self-existing, and unchanging. So this is a huge problem because we are not. We are more of a process. Because of impermanence, things are constantly changing. That when we were born, we didn't even know our names. Someone gave us our names. And as we went through life, a psychologist will kind of divide it up into stages. You know, there's the infant, infancy, and then there's early childhood, then you get to be a teenager, and you have a very different approach to life, and then you become an adult, you leave home, you're out on your own, and you have a different approach to life, and gradually you mature, you become middle-aged, and then you get into the retirement years, and then there are geriatric people that study geriatrics, and then there's hospice workers, where a person that's going to be dying soon, they have a very different mental approach to things. So our mind is constantly changing, or at least the contents of our mind is constantly changing. And what we think we are is a result of our relationships with our world and other people. So I'm going to go on to the fourth Dharma. I could talk more about that, but I won't. But that's the third Dharma, is realizing egolessness and selflessness. And also the projecting other people to be solid, real, self-existing, and so forth. So the last one is, grant your blessings so that I may transform confusion into wisdom. And by the way, we are asking for the Guru's blessings when we say grant your blessings. We're asking the Guru to help us. One translation of the Tibetan word for blessings is to engulf in splendor. So we're asking the Guru to help us cut through our confusion, to experience the ultimate nature of mind, you might say. And so, as I said, the third Dharma is about realizing emptiness and egolessness. But this is something that is not realized naturally in the third Dharma, but acquired through practice. Now, this emptiness is not voidness, as it sometimes is translated. It's rather, it has wisdom. It's a combination of expanse and wisdom. And that wisdom has three aspects: knowledge, tender love, and great capacity, according to Trungpa Rinpoche. And so an enlightened being like the Buddha completely manifested this wisdom. We have this wisdom inside of us, but it's obscured or covered or stained. Now, the stains are superficial and adventitious. An example, a classic example would be that of a gold Buddha statue that has been buried in the ground for 1,000 years. When you dig it up, it's going to be dirty. But if you clean off the dirt and polish it up, it returns to its original luster. And so our wisdom is like that. It's not damaged, it's just obscured. And so this wisdom is the space where our thoughts happen. This is the space where the content of our mind occurs. But no matter what the content is, the basic wisdom is unaffected. So in Vajrayana, that is working directly with realizing this wisdom of ours. And so this fourth Dharma of confusion dawning as wisdom is in Vajrayana, we are trained and taught to look directly at the mind itself. This doesn't happen naturally. It takes a lot of training to be able to do it. But as you practice this, you start seeing the mind as both empty and luminous, or empty and clear. And so then, as we practice this, and there are two ways. When we're doing deity practice, there's a moment of, you might say, looking at the nature of the mind. And then there is Maha Mudra practice. Now, there's a lot that I haven't talked about that needs to be done to get from sitting meditation to these advanced practices. But to go on, I can talk about that later. There are three types of experience that a meditator can have when they are at this level. The first is experience of well-being or bliss or pleasure. The second experience is that of extraordinary clarity. The third is the experience of non-conceptuality, being aware beyond thoughts. Now, what happens with, and you could have this in sitting meditation too, by the way, what happens is that it's easy to become attached to these thoughts, or excuse me, these experiences. And then that stops progress because they're just temporary experiences. They're indications, but they're temporary experiences. And as we travel the path, we're not trying to have temporary experiences. We're trying to become enlightened, which is permanent. What happens when confusion dawns as wisdom is that our confusion comes from the same place. It comes from wisdom. It's just that it's confused wisdom. And with, again, looking directly at the mind and experiencing what it is, eventually, that all the obscurations, the stains, the kleshas, and so forth are purified, and they dawn as wisdom. The wisdom comes from within. It doesn't come from outside of us. And so this Yeshe, this primordial self-existing wisdom, becomes completely manifest when the kleshas have been abandoned. And so the energy of the kleshas are transformed and not extinguished.